Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Today I plan on addressing something of a bugbear of mine, or rather, a bugbear of yours, which has found its way into my point of view. Sorry, my first-person perspective point of view. Sweet, but what is it? Why should I care? What do you care? How did I get here? I'm glad you're asking these questions, but first you need to answer this question. Are you sure you want to know? You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed, your comments section, believe whatever you want to believe. Take the red pill, you stay in this video, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. POV is point of view. Point of view is POV. They're the same, you see, as vast as they are shallow and without meaning. Let's go back to early baby linguistics. Not to when you're actually a baby, though. I'm talking like maybe object permanence and up. So ideally, when point of view is introduced as a concept, it is also introduced with the three descriptors that make it, well, an actually relevant term to describe anything. I'm talking first person, third person, and the absolutely bonkers second person perspectives. Now, I think the best way to talk about this is to perhaps establish a strict linguistic definition of the term, and then their wider applications as it adheres to media we consume, that is, literature of some form or visual. So first person's point of view. First and foremost, you can't spell first person without I, and it just so happens that I features quite a bit in this medium. What do you mean you also can't spell third person without it? In first person point of view, the perspective that we, the viewer, are given is that of a character within the story. That is to say, the narrator within the story may be an active participant of events, or they may simply be standing on the sidelines, more of an observer, and relaying the story onto you. But the important part is that they are the intermediary. In a manner of speaking, you are them for the duration of this tale. You see things through their eyes. You feel things through their feelings. In writing, first-person perspective looks a lot like this. In visual media, first-person perspective looks a lot like this. Third-person point of view. Third and third most, you can't spell third person without I, and it just so happens that I doesn't feature nearly at all in this medium. In a third-person point of view, the perspectives we are given are generally that of one who exists outside of the characters. For the most part, they exist as a sort of removed and fair reteller of events. But of course there are exceptions to this rule, as the narrator can have a bit of personality and a penchant for pizzazz in how they deliver the script. There are two distinct types of third-person perspective. We have third-person omniscient and third-person limited. Third-person omniscient. The narrator is essentially a spectator god. As the term omniscient belays, they exist outside the story and generally know everything about everything. We get a take on any given character's thoughts, feelings, and motivations, even if it's not explicitly revealed to other characters within the story. Third-person limited. Though this sounds like another awful clothing line by some wannabe influencer, is a narrator who exists as an over-the-shoulder spectator of a specific character, or characters throughout a story. We aren't necessarily given the direct thoughts of the characters, but the impressions and interpretations of events we are given can still be influenced by the characters we are focusing on at that given point in time. Third-person objective is basically third-person omniscient, where you don't know all. In fact, you know no character's thoughts. Yeah, just moving right along. Second person point of view. Last and lastmost, you can't spell second person without ekend and ursin and an S and a P. And it just so happens that Peck and Sursin is a fun way to talk about this perspective, because it's a bit out there as far as narrative devices are concerned. In a second person point of view, the perspective, and let me just grab a dictionary directly here so I don't mess it up, is a technique of narrative in which the action is driven by a character ascribed to the reader, one known as you. The reader is immersed into the narrative as a character involved in the story. The narrator describes what you do and lets you into your own thoughts and background. Best as I can tell, this perspective roughly fits into two kinds of storytelling type beats. There's the interactive kind, where you make decisions which actually, or seemingly actually, influence the story. So let's say Dungeons and Dragons or a choose your own story kind of adventure. There's the pseudo-interactive, almost third-person type of story, where you are prompted to make decisions by the environment and proceed to do said actions as if you were just another character in the story already. And you, as the reader of the story, are along for the ride, as if you were given a role in a play that's already been scripted. Anyway, why is anyone making a video about this now? Well, if you've been in a coma for the past several years, there's something of a resurgence in the usage of the term POV. Modern usage of POV and the comments that I can't stand to read. So I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure which one came first, the chicken or the egg. Or in this context, the usage of the term POV or the people complaining about the usage of the term POV. This argument can go both ways, so let's take a moment to establish a baseline and go from there. Let's assume that you've only started paying attention to POV in recent years as it's transcended through social media and memes. So where those actuallys are right. POV, at least as it was first used, in particular as it pertains to memes and videos on TikTok or whatever, was indeed from the first-person perspective. This is further honed by the fact that the videos which often use POV do so within a greater context, usually establishing you as the character within a given scenario. So it's fairly reasonable to expect that we, the viewer, are about to be thrust into a situation in which we have the first-person perspective of events that are about to unfold. Now, where those actuallys are wrong, POV, as it is used now, is inherently without meaning. There's also something of an unspoken rule that's reasonably true, in visual media at least, and that it's very difficult to interpret the emotions of your face if you can't see it, and, you're not making it because you're watching a video. But that leads me to my next point. So consider POV not as a linguistic term, but as a technological or artistic term. I'm gonna borrow a quote and a question from Brandon Sanderson's The Way of Kings. And that quote is, "What is it that people value in others?" And you can consider that for a moment. So take, for example, the concept of a meme. Again, borrowing straight from the dictionary, meme is a unit of cultural information spread by imitation. The term meme, from Greek mimia, meaning imitated, was introduced in 1976 by the British evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins in his work The Selfish Gene. Its true definition is both strict and loose enough to allow for a myriad of interpretation. If you want to make friends at parties, you can go around informing everyone that a lot of what we call memes used to be more specifically called image macros. And all of that is to say, meme as a concept, as a word, has been hyperinflated and manhandled to the definition of what it is now, which is basically synonymous with a joke, and that we live in a world where pervasive ideologies collide. On the one hand, we tend to try and give due credit to those who come first, or attempt to establish something as the de facto state of being. I cannot find the true first example of someone using the phrase POV alone in the title or description of their video. Napoleon 1927 appears to be the first movie to utilize the technique, but, well, let's dig into the Wikipedia article for a second. A POV shot need not be in the strict point of view of an actual single character in a film. Sometimes the point of view shot is taken over the shoulder of a character, third person, who remains visible on the screen. Sometimes a POV shot is shared, dual or triple, i.e. it represents the joint POV of two or more characters. Point of view, or simply POV, camera angles record the scene from a particular player's viewpoint. The point of view is an objective angle, but since it falls between the objective and subjective angle, it should be placed in a separate category and given special consideration. A point of view shot is as close as an objective shot can approach a subjective shot, and still remain objective. The camera is positioned at the side of a subjective player whose viewpoint is being depicted so that the audience is given the impression that they are standing cheek to cheek with the off-screen player. The viewer does not see the events through the player's eyes, as in a subjective shot in which the camera trades places with the screen player. He sees the events from a player's viewpoint, as if standing alongside him. Thus, the camera angle remains objective, since it is an unseen observer not involved in the action. Joseph V. Mascheli, The 5 C's of Cinematography. The most important thing about this is that we are experiencing what is genuinely referred to as a POV shot, where we, the viewers, still aren't the center of attention. We're still slightly askew to the action, an outside observer, if you will. You can also see shot reverse shot for what this looks like in practical application. If you want the true definition of first-person point of view, Joseph Mascheli addresses that a few pages above. Mascheli actually coins the term as being a subjective camera angle, going on to state that a subjective camera films from a personal viewpoint. In this, the viewer is placed in the picture, either on his own as an active participant or by trading places with the person in the picture and seeing the event through his eyes. The viewer is also involved in the picture when anyone in the scene looks directly to the camera lens, thus establishing a performer-viewer eye-to-eye relationship. Now, I'm too lazy to go and find the first video where POV was unabashedly used in the title, without any other modifiers. But for the sake of my argument, let's just say that it happened on TikTok. Now, if anyone give me like another instance of marketing materials or actual titles that just say POV XYZ, then I'll pin it as the top comment or something. But otherwise, all the historic users of what we know as the first-person perspective, POV, tend to only say that in the long-winded advertising materials, which are more so talking about the art behind making the videos rather than trying to sell the video as art, if that makes sense. Take for instance Hardcore Henry. It's one of the top contenders for relatively fresh in my mind, entirely first-person perspective action movie. And it doesn't go around calling itself POV Hardcore Henry. The IMDb listing for it just says, Henry is resurrected from death with no memory, and he must save his wife from a telekinetic warlord with a plan to bioengineer soldiers. The back of the box blurb is a quote from IndieWire, which refers to the plot in terms of second-person pronouns, you, rather than Henry or I, which is technically a semantic argument that I'm throwing in here. Part goalpost shifting, but also because I'm bad at writing scripts. You see, the problem with first-person perspectives is when they slip in and out of yous and being the eyes of a video. My point still stands though. The actual promo material doesn't go around just saying POV. In fact, the only other place I can think of that might have done it first is the sexual media conglomerate colloquially referred to as porn. Now, usually sex is the driver of all technological innovation. When I started writing this script, I legitimately figured that porn would be the first example of a first-person POV shot ever. The fact that I couldn't back that claim up with facts just leads me to suspect that I haven't looked hard enough or that the government is covering it up because of supposedly good morals. But to conclude this entire tangent, I'll just say that the first-person perspective POV porn that was ever made is still technically up for debate, but is largely credited to Jamie Gillis. Yeah, Jamie Gillis. But at the time, it was called gonzo pornography, the term gonzo being a reference to gonzo journalism, which is a style of journalism that is written without claims of objectivity, often including the reporter as part of the story, using a first-person narrative. All of that is to say, each one of these mediums of media had prefaces and affixes to indicate that POV, which we are viewing, is of the first-person variety. And over time, the term became known as the shorthand of just POV. Whether it's in a sweet and innocuous POV your stepsister is stuck in the drying machine again video, or if it's in a terrifying POV you're an ice cube about to be kicked under the fridge video. POV as a standalone concept was indoctrinated as being associated with the first-person perspective, especially in conjunction with the word you. Now, language being the thing that it is, we also have to accept that people using the term POV to make videos in all manner of perspectives are also correct, or at least no more wrong than the people before them. The people in the comments lamenting the bastardization of their language are in for a rude awakening when they realize that co-opting of terms, symbols, slang, phrases, and a number of things has been happening since the dawn of time. Anyway, while the foothold that POV had was tenuous at best to begin with, even at worst we have seen a number of reasons, in no particular order, as people have strayed from the usage of POV to mean first person for any number of reasons. Maybe people legitimately didn't understand that POV was supposed to be shot from a strictly first-person point of view. Maybe people legitimately did understand that POV was supposed to be shot from a strictly first-person point of view, but part of the visual nature of their video dictated that they still needed to be visible to get their point across. And yet the nature of their actions still dictated that the viewer know that they are you, and that you, by association, are also going through the same emotions or actions. Maybe there's some sort of 4D chess at play, as new video creators who understand that POV was supposed to be shot from a strictly first-person point of view see these people misappropriating the term POV to now include third-person perspectives, and so they too also start to create these videos using non-first-person perspectives, further adding to the collective weight of POV videos without a clearly defined point of view. Layers of irony abound, and we're left with the market of media as it is now. Visual content with a wide variety of payoff, and in every single video, there's at least one comment that seeks to ignite a pseudo-intellectual, rhetoric-slinging nonsense fest, in which neither side can definitively back up their claims, nor can they provide their GPS coordinates for a proper POV or about to catch these hands compilation. The joke here is that, either way, they could still be the winner. The takeaways. Look, you can use POV however you want. If you rustle some jimmies down in the comments, well, I think Jesus said it best when he said, and I quote, "Hoes mad. If someone is going to be so bent out of shape that someone used an arbitrary and non-specific term out of context, it speaks volumes as to the state of their life. In its current state, the unspecified POV has transcended a neat and rational explanation, and instead is best surmised as, you had to be there. Just like what happened with the term meme. If we're aiming to be proper in our labeling, I figure that we need to start tagging our videos or other works to which this applies with additional modifiers, so rather than POV, we have something like 1 PPOV, 2 PPOV, or 3 PPOV. But given that none of those are fun to type out or say, I don't think anyone will do that. Now, all of that being said, and to their credit, this is a point that many first-person perspective is the only POV sayers have been saying, if you're going to go around and use the unspecified phrase point of view to describe your piece of work, consider the following. In what other way would someone view your work? It is essentially a nothing burger of a definition. It's just another shorthand notation in a long line of otherwise egregious but commonplace atrocities, in spite of or honor of this thing that we call language and the exchange of ideas. It's just a different font of any number of "this is so me's," or "my face wins," or "your face wins," or "back in my day-isms" that have existed and will continue to exist until the end of time. It goes without saying that the media which one aims to present is a story from somebody's perspective. So essentially we're just saying point of view, or ATM machine, or chai tea, and so on. Nevertheless, creators have and will continue to try and further convey meaning in the way they present this information, whether explicitly for search engine optimization, or explicitly to poke fun at the people who do that, or because they misspelled POG, or because of some other underlying mumbo-jumbo about humanity's inherent want to connect through shared experience. I don't know, I just work here. Thank you for watching, and good night.